Hey, it's Surfing Victorian Report, Wednesday, the 29th of July, 2026. G'day everyone, and welcome back to Hey, it's Surfing. Victoria is waking up to a serious winter surf day. A weakening low system is moving across Bass Strait behind yesterday's cold front, bringing gale-force winds, showers, possible thunderstorms, and a very large pulse of southern ocean swell. There is no shortage of energy in the water today. The challenge is finding somewhere capable of handling both the swell and the wind. The surf coast is comfortably the best prospect, while the exposed beaches of Mornington, Phillip Island and the Bass Coast will be extremely powerful, heavily swept and generally suitable only for highly experienced surfers. Let's head around the Victorian coastline. The Bureau has gale warnings current for the Central Coast, Central Gippsland and East Gippsland waters, along with a strong wind warning for Western Port. Across the Central Coast, west to northwesterly winds are forecast at 25 to 30 knots, reaching 35 knots during the morning before turning southwesterly at 20 to 30 knots. Seas are running between 2 and 3 metres. The offshore swell begins from the west at 3 to 5 metres, turns southwesterly and builds to 4 to 6 metres during the morning, before easing into the 2.5 to 4 metre range later today. Showers are expected throughout the day with the chance of an early thunderstorm and possible small hail. Those are offshore marine figures, not the height of every breaking wave. Actual surf size will vary dramatically according to exposure, shelter, reef shape, and how much of the swell reaches each individual break. The broad call is straightforward. Today brings plenty of swell, but very few generally clean options. Starting on the surf coast, and this is the clear statewide pick, the TORQUAY reefs offer substantially more protection from today's west to southwesterly airflow than Victoria's fully exposed beaches. Model guidance for the Torquay area carries a very powerful southwest pulse of roughly 4.5 metres at 14 to 15 seconds today. That is modelled near shore swell energy rather than a direct measurement of the breaking waves, but it confirms that plenty of power will be reaching the region. Torquay Point and the more protected inside reefs are estimated around 3 to 5 feet, with larger waves possible when the stronger lines wrap into the bay. Bells Beach and Winky Pop should generally sit around 6 to 10 feet, with occasional larger sets where the long period swell focuses onto the reefs. The open coastline west of Bells will be substantially larger and extremely powerful. There is no generally calm window today. The best opportunity should be through the morning once there is enough light to assess the sea state properly, and before the swell begins its afternoon easing trend. The early west to northwesterly wind will be more favourable for the established reefs, but gusts near 35 knots will make paddling, takeoffs and positioning difficult. As the wind turns southwesterly, more texture will reach even protected locations. At Point Lonsdale, low tide is about 4:54 this morning. The tide then rises toward a high shortly after midday, falls again late in the afternoon and begins rising once more tonight. Official tide times are reference port predictions, so individual surf coast breaks will vary slightly. The rising morning tide should add water and consistency to the reefs, but it will also strengthen flow through channels and around rock platforms. The major hazards are large clean-up sets, powerful sweeps, slippery entries, strong wind during takeoff, and difficult exits when swells move through. The surf coast is today's best region, but Bells and Winky remain expert-only propositions. Moving across to the Mornington Peninsula and the exposed beaches will receive the full force of the swell based on the Bureau's offshore forecast and the peninsula's direct exposure. Gunnematta, St Andrews, Rye and Portsea are estimated to reduce surf around 8 to 12 feet, with substantially larger clean-up sets possible at the most exposed banks. Those breaking wave heights are estimates rather than observations, and the actual size will vary between individual stretches of the beach. Regardless of the exact number, there will be a huge amount of water moving along the coast, and the west to southwesterly wind is cross onshore or onshore across most of the open peninsula, producing rough faces, major lateral sweep and rapidly shifting takeoff zones. There is no premium window at the exposed beaches today. Conditions may appear slightly more organised early, while the wind retains some northwest in it, but the strength of the airflow and the scale of the swell will remain serious from most light. The most sheltered corners will be dramatically smaller and may offer the unrealistic surfing options. Even then, surfers should expect strong currents and rapidly changing conditions as swells across the coast. The peninsula follows the same broad tidal movement as Point Lonsdale, with low water before dawn and an incoming tide throughout the morning. The rising tide may push more energy across outer banks and into deeper gutters. Primary hazards are heavy rips, relentless longshore sweep, outside cleanup sets, cold squalls and difficult exits. For most surfers, the open Mornington beaches are a write-off today. Phillip Island and the Bass Coast will also be large and heavily wind affected. Western Port is under a strong wind warning with west-to-northwesterly winds at 15 to 25 knots, reaching 30 knots west of Sandy Point before turning southwesterly during the morning. Seas around the western entrance may reach 1.5 to 2.5 metres before gradually easing tonight. Cape Woolamai, Forest Cave and the exposed Bass Coast are estimated around 6 to 10 feet, with larger sets possible at the strongest banks. Kilcunda and the open beaches will carry substantial raw energy, strong currents and very limited wind protection. Smiths Beach, Surfers Point and YCW will be considerably smaller. Those more protected locations offer the best practical chance of finding something manageable, although the strong airflow and tidal movement will still affect surface quality. At Stony Point, low tide is around 5:18 this morning. The large tidal movement will increase flow through Western Port's entrances. The tide then rises strongly toward a midday high before falling again through the afternoon. That large tidal movement will increase flow through the Western Port entrances, channels and reef systems. There is no dependable premium window at Woolamai today. The principal hazards are deep gutters, violent lateral sweep, strong tidal flow, large cleanup sets and difficult exits. For most surfers, the exposed beach is 30 feet from shore. Moving into East Gippsland and the marine environment becomes increasingly serious through the day. The Bureau has a gale warning current with westerly winds of 20 to 30 knots, reaching 35 knots before turning southwesterly during the early afternoon. Seas build to 2 to 3 metres, reaching 3 to 4 metres through the far east and offshore waters around midday. The west to southwesterly swell increases from 1 to 2 metres early, reaches 2 to 3 metres during the morning and may build to 3 to 4 metres in the far east around midday. Showers are expected along with possible thunderstorms and small hail offshore. Because the swell begins with a strong westerly component, it will not translate evenly onto every beach. Lake's entrance may remain closer to 2 to 4 feet, with plenty of short period and crossed up energy. In 90 Mile Beach may offer 3 to 5 foot peaks, where the banks are in line with the swell. Cape Connor and Marlow and the exposed beaches towards Mallacoota could reach 6 to 8 feet or more as the stronger southerly component develops. Those are breaking wave estimates based on the official offshore forecast and local exposure rather than direct observations at HP. Model guidance near Lake's entrance shows the strongest local energy arriving in a relatively short period, which is likely to create rougher and less organised ocean than the longer period pulse affecting Western Victoria. Lake's entrance moved through an early low, a morning high and another lower tide during the early afternoon. Bars and ocean entrances will be especially hazardous. A nearby beach may look relatively modest while the entrance remains dangerous due to strong tidal flow meeting large offshore swell and gale-force wind. East Gippsland has plenty of energy today, but that very limited quality. Tides and statewide hazards. The Surf Coast, Mornington Peninsula and Western Port begin the day around low water before a substantial morning rise. Lake's entrance has an earlier morning high followed by a lower tide around the middle of the day. These are Bureau reference point predictions and won't match every individual surf break. Exact main hazards today go well beyond wave height. Expect gale-force gusts, sudden swells, possible thunderstorms, small hail, rapidly changing surface conditions, strong currents, and large waves arriving after deceptive pauses. The Bureau advises that wind gusts may be around 40% stronger than the forecast average. It also advises that maximum individual waves may reach roughly twice the significant wave height forecast for the marine district. That does not mean every wave will be double in size. It means isolated extreme waves can arrive well above the average, particularly during swell. Watch the ocean carefully before making any decisions. Identify a safe exit and keep track of how quickly you're drifting. Thursday begins the easing process across the central coast. Southwesterly winds drop to 15 to 20 knots. Seas ease toward 1 metre later in the day, while the southwest swell settles into the 2 to 3 metre range. The surf coast should remain the best version with a solid residual reef surf and noticeably less wind than today. Mornington and Phillip Island will remain seismic and affected by the southwesterly breeze, but conditions should gradually become East Gippsland takes longer to settle. Southwesterly winds remain between 15 to 25 knots after a strong start, while the swell shifts more southerly between roughly 1.5 to 3 metres. Friday currently looks like the cleaner recovery day. Central coast winds ease to 10 to 15 knots and may become variable during the afternoon. That should produce quality reef surf along the surf coast, with more locations potentially opening as the wind drops. Inside Western Port, Friday brings winds below 10 knots and seas below half a metre. That could reopen more of Phillip Island and the peninsula, although remaining swell size and overnight wobble will determine the final quality. Saturday currently favours the exposed beaches, north to northwesterly winds below 10 knots and forecast inside Western Port, which would suit Mornington and Phillip Island. The swell will be easing, so the most exposed banks should offer the greatest consistency. Confidence becomes noticeably lower from Sunday onwards. The most likely trend is small residual southwest surf with lower winds, but the timing and influence of the next southern ocean system cannot yet be called reliable. So the final call for Wednesday, the 29th of July, is very clear. The surf coast is the only broadly reliable region, and even there the swell will be large, powerful and demanding. TORQUAY's protected inside reefs offer the most manageable option. Bells Beach and Winky Pop will be solid with strong currents and large cleanups. The Mornington Peninsula, Phillip Island and the exposed Bass Coast will be extremely powerful, heavily swept and generally unsuited for anyone without extensive experience in serious surf. East Gippsland faces gale-force winds and rapidly building ocean conditions, particularly toward Cape Common, Marlow and the Far East. For most surfers, today is not about chasing the biggest number on a forecast. Choose shelter, stay well within your ability, and remember that Thursday and Friday should bring improving conditions as the wind and swell begin to settle. That's your Victorian surf report for Wednesday, 29th of July. Thanks for watching Hey It's Surfing. Stay warm, respect the ocean, and we'll see you around the Victorian coast.